In the 1960s, Bob Crane had everything an actor could want. With his perfect smile and quick jokes, he won over fans as Colonel Robert Hogan, the smart leader in the hit TV show Hogan's Heroes. When the cameras weren't rolling, he was just as charming, known for his sharp humor and friendly personality, but while the world saw him as the nice TV star, behind the scenes, his life was falling apart in ways most people couldn't imagine. What started as a career built on making people laugh would end in backstabbing, scandal, and a horrible death that left more questions than answers. The rise of a star. Before he became famous on TV, Bob Crane had already made a name for himself on the radio in Los Angeles. People called him the man of 1,000 voices. And he hosted a popular morning show on KNX where he interviewed famous people like Marilyn Monroe, Bob Hope, and Charlton Heston. His quick thinking and natural confidence made him a favorite among Hollywood's biggest stars. Even Walt Disney once called him the fastest wit in the West. His success on radio led him into acting. In 1961, legendary TV writer Carl Reiner was on Crane's radio show and later offered him a guest spot on The Dick Van Dyke Show as a cheating husband. That single role opened the door to more chances, including a regular part as a happy-go-lucky dentist on The Donna Reed Show. By 1965, Crane's agent sent him the script for a new TV show called Hogan's Heroes. At first, he thought it was a war drama, not knowing it was a comedy about Allied prisoners of war constantly outsmarting their silly German guards. Despite the weird idea, Hogan's Heroes became a huge hit. Crane's role as Colonel Robert Hogan made him famous across the country. The show ran for 6 seasons from 1965 to 1971, earning him 2 Emmy nominations and making him one of TV's most recognizable stars. His face showed up on billboards, lunchboxes, and magazines everywhere. For millions of viewers, he was the smiling, clever leader who always had a plan. On screen, Crane was living the dream. But even at the peak of his fame, people close to him started noticing changes. His personal life became stressed. His need for excitement grew, and his behavior when the cameras weren't rolling hinted at an obsession that would slowly eat him alive. For now, though, the world only saw the laughter, the secret double life. Behind the smile and charm that made Bob Crane a household name, there was a very different reality happening. In the mid-1960s, his interest in photography started turning into something more personal. At first, he simply enjoyed playing around with cameras, taking pictures and testing new video equipment. But slowly, the camera became more than a hobby. It turned into the main part of his private world. The turning point came when his Hogan's Heroes co-star Richard Dawson introduced him to John Henry Carpenter. A video equipment salesman for Sony Electronics. Carpenter was well connected in Hollywood and gave Crane access to the newest technology. The two quickly became friends, bonding over their shared interest in recording equipment. Carpenter even helped him set up devices in hotels while they were traveling. What started as a friendship built on curiosity eventually led to behavior that worried those who knew Crane. Best together, they started going to bars and nightclubs where Crane's celebrity status got plenty of attention. He often introduced Carpenter as his manager, and the pair became inseparable, traveling together and spending countless hours playing with new gadgets. While some saw this as harmless fun, others were disturbed by how dependent Crane seemed on his constant filming. Co-workers noticed he was becoming distracted, more focused on his side hobby than with the work that had once defined him. The stress spilled into his personal life. His marriage to Anne Turchan, his high school sweetheart and the mother of his 3 children, ended in divorce after more than 20 years. He later married Patricia Olson, known to viewers of Hogan's Heroes as Sigrid Valdis, but the same problems followed him. Even during the filming of Disney's 1973 family movie Superdad, Crane's behavior on set was reported to have raised concerns among executives, hurting his reputation in the industry. By the late 1970s, Crane was no longer the TV star he had once been. He found steady work in stage shows and seemed determined to rebuild his career. At the same time, however, his friendship with Carpenter had become a source of tension. Crane told friends that he wanted to move on, to leave behind old habits and start fresh. But by the summer of 1978, it was already too late. The murder in Scottsdale. By June 1978, Bob Crane was living in Scottsdale, Arizona, performing in a stage comedy called Beginner's Luck at the Windmill Dinner Theater. At 49 years old, just 2 weeks away from his 50th birthday, he seemed determined to change direction. Friends later remembered that he had talked about divorcing Patricia Olson and ending his friendship with John Carpenter. He wanted to wipe the slate clean. But before he could take that step, his life came to a sudden and tragic end. On the afternoon of June 29th, co-star Victoria Ann Berry went to check on Crane after he failed to show up for a lunch meeting. Inside his apartment at Winfield Place, she found a scene that would haunt Hollywood for decades. Crane was found dead in his bed. The injuries to his head were severe, and investigators believe the object used may have been a camera tripod. An electrical cord was also found near him, though it was not what killed him. What bothered detectives most was how little mess there was in the room. Nothing had been stolen, and there were no signs of someone breaking in. Whoever was responsible was someone Crane trusted enough to let inside, or perhaps someone who came in while he was sleeping. That small circle of suspects quickly pointed toward John Carpenter. He had flown into Phoenix just days earlier to spend time with Crane. The two had dinner the night before and, according to reports, even watched some of their private recordings together. Carpenter claimed he went back to his own motel afterward, but witnesses later said his timeline didn't match up. The crime scene also revealed a hidden side of Crane's personal life. Police found cameras, tripods, tapes, and cables throughout the apartment, filled with recordings that shocked the public. The beloved star of Hogan's Heroes was suddenly shown in headlines as a man fighting private struggles. For his family, the discovery was devastating. For investigators, it became both a clue and a distraction. The equipment tied Crane's private world directly to Carpenter, but the shocking nature of the evidence complicated the search for truth. What was clear from the very beginning, however, was that this was no random break-in. It was personal. The investigation and trial. The Scottsdale Police Department was not fully prepared to handle a major case in 1978. They had no specialized murder division, and mistakes at the crime scene would trouble investigators for decades. Detectives collected tapes, photographs, and recording equipment from Crane's apartment. But the handling of evidence was inconsistent. Friends and even family members, including Crane's oldest son, Robert, were allowed to enter the apartment before it was properly secured, leaving behind fingerprints, hair, and footprints that further complicated the scene. Despite these issues, suspicion soon centered on John Carpenter. He had been staying nearby, had spent time with Crane the night before, and his rental car contained smears of blood that matched Crane's type. At the time, DNA testing was not yet available, and blood typing alone was not enough to prove guilt. Without a clear weapon or fingerprints, the Maricopa County District Attorney declined to file charges. Carpenter returned to Los Angeles, but his reputation was permanently damaged. For more than 10 years, the case went quiet. Then, in 1990, investigators Barry Vassell and Jim Raines reopened the files. New advances in DNA testing gave them hope. They reviewed the evidence and discovered an old photograph of Carpenter's car interior that appeared to show a biological fragment. The original samples had been lost, but the discovery was enough for prosecutors to move forward. In 1992, John Carpenter was arrested and formally charged in connection with Crane's death. The trial, which began in 1994, played out like a courtroom drama. The prosecution argued that Carpenter, upset over Crane's decision to end their friendship, had acted out of anger. They presented the blood evidence, the history between the two men, and testimony from Crane's son, Scotty, who said his father had repeatedly talked about cutting Carpenter out of his life. The defense responded by questioning how reliable the evidence was. They pointed out that the key biological sample was missing, that the crime scene had been poorly preserved, and that the tripod theory was pure guesswork. They also pointed to the possibility of other suspects, such as people who may have held grudges against Crane. After weeks of testimony, the jury was not convinced. In 1994, John Carpenter was found not guilty. He maintained his innocence until his death in 1998. Officially, the case returned to the cold files, still unresolved and unfinished. The family's struggle and the legacy of scandal for Bob Crane's children. The trial brought no peace. His oldest son, Robert, described how painful it was to watch the most personal details of his father's life turned into a public spectacle. The courtroom was filled with testimony and evidence that shifted attention away from Crane's decades of work in radio and television. Instead of bringing answers, the trial left his family with more questions and a lasting sense of hurt. Robert David Crane. Another of his sons later spoke about his suspicion that Patricia Olson, Crane's second wife, known on screen as Sigrid Valdis, may have had a deeper connection to events. He noted that Bob's will left his entire estate to Olson, excluding his children and first wife. Nobody got anything out of this except for one person, Robert David said. Prosecutors never considered Olsen a suspect, but the speculation added another layer of bitterness to the family's grief. Crane's son, Scotty, also struggled with how his father was portrayed. He maintained that those who appeared in the recordings were willing participants, but media coverage rarely showed nuance. Headlines painted Crane as a fallen star consumed by controversy, overshadowing his reputation as a pioneering radio host and Emmy-nominated actor. What he accomplished on stage and screen was drowned out by the darker aspects of his story. The funeral in July 1978 had shown just how loved Crane was in Hollywood, around 200 mourners, including stars like Patty Duke, Carroll O'Connor, and John Astin, came to St. Paul the Apostle Church in Los Angeles to pay their respects. His co-stars from Hogan's Heroes served as pallbearers, yet in the years that followed, Hollywood seemed to quietly step away. Reruns of Hogan's Heroes declined, and Crane's name was often whispered with controversy rather than celebrated for talent. For his family, this was the most painful cut of all. The man they knew was complex, flawed, yes, but also warm, funny, and gifted. Instead of being remembered for the joy he brought to millions, he was frozen in time as the subject of an unsolved case, his achievements buried beneath a cloud that never fully lifted. New DNA tests, Hollywood's memory, and the final tragedy. Even after John Carpenter's acquittal in 1994, the Scottsdale Police and Maricopa County prosecutors continued to revisit Bob Crane's case. Technology was advancing, and there was hope that DNA could succeed where 1970s forensic methods had failed. In 2016, Phoenix television reporter John Hook received permission to retest the remaining blood samples taken from Carpenter's rental car. Using modern techniques, analysts found 2 male DNA sequences. One belonged to an unidentified man, while the other was too degraded to provide a conclusion. Crucially, the tests consumed all of the remaining material, making any further analysis impossible. The case once again returned to limbo. This result frustrated Crane's surviving family. His son, Robert, who published Crane, Sex, Celebrity, and My Father's Unsolved Murder in 2015, admitted that closure would never come. He described living with his father's death as living in a constant fog. Scotty, meanwhile, pushed back against portrayals of his father in popular culture. When the 2002 film Autofocus depicted Crane in an exaggerated and sensational way, Scotty argued that it was inaccurate. He even created a website, bobcrane.com, to share documents and material that he felt showed a fuller, more balanced picture of his father's life. Yet the damage to Crane's reputation remained. Hollywood rarely mentions his name without a reminder of controversy. His greatest achievement, Hogan's Heroes, is almost always discussed in the same breath as his unsolved case. What was once a groundbreaking sitcom is now overshadowed by the mystery surrounding its star. For the public, Crane is not remembered primarily as the gifted improviser or the charismatic colonel, but as the man forever linked to an unfinished story. The tragedy is not only in how he died, but in how he is remembered. Bob Crane spent decades making people laugh, bringing humor to even the most unlikely settings, and earning admiration across the country. Yet, because of one night in Scottsdale and the revelations that followed, his entire legacy was rewritten. His case remains unsolved. His memory unsettled, and the final chapter of his life defined not by triumph, but by betrayal and sadness. Bob Crane's story is one of Hollywood's darkest tragedies. A man who made millions laugh on screen was ultimately undone by secrets he couldn't escape. And a crime that was never solved. Decades later, his family still searches for answers, but the truth may be gone forever. What do you think really happened in Scottsdale that night in 1978? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories.